Booktown on Sunday is presented by Creative Clunes, a vibrant rural hub that supports making, telling and sharing stories in all art forms.
Welcome everyone. I'd like to thank you all for being here and not at home watching the soccer. As Angela mentioned, I'm on the board of Creative Clunes. I've recently just left the Australian Crime Writers Committee this year, so I'm no longer on that, but I was with Sisters in Crime as well, so I love my crime. And I'm here interrogating Bright Light, Mark Smith. I will soften him up for you for about 45 minutes and then you get a chance to interrogate him as well. So welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we're here to talk about this book, Where Truth Ends. I'll give you a quick overview. I promise no spoilers, but it's a thriller. The main protagonist is Meg, who is mid-20s?
Mid-20s.
Mid-20s. Yeah. She is educated, she's still studying, she's working at Acme in the city. Hit a bit of a dull phase in her life, comes across a secretive environmental activist group that she becomes part of, who are keen to do what Extinction Rebellion do, but doubled and make more of an impact. There's two timelines we follow. We meet Meg as she's meeting this secretive group. They're not allowed to use their real names. They're not allowed to talk about their lives. It's all very secretive. And then we have the current timeline where this group goes into the city for a protest. They are all disguised. They're in a truck. They park at the main intersection in the city, so right outside Acme, Flinders Street, the church, everything is right there. What they plan to do is make a lot of noise, have a banner, light some flares and then it'll take off. So that happens, but the truck then explodes and no one was expecting it. So Meg is no longer a protester, she's a terrorist and she's being hunted by the authorities as at the same time she's trying to find out who sold them out and exploded the truck. So it's a great read. I think I did it 2 nights. It's a great compulsive read. So I'm going to start, as Angela mentioned, you started as a young adult writer. And the Winter series, I think most of you would know, The Road to Winter and the 2 books that follow it. The Road to Winter is on the school syllabus. I know my daughter read it. Yeah. Must be exciting for you to have young people read your book. What do you hope they take away from it when they're finished studying that book?
Yeah, it is. It's really exciting to have them, and I'm really lucky in that I go into probably 60 or 70 schools a year to talk about books, about my own books, when they're on curriculum, doing workshops, that sort of thing. I always begin by telling them the story that I was not a reader myself when I was a kid. When I was a young boy, I was a total outdoors boy. Like, lived to be outdoors. One of the reasons being I'm one of 10 kids, so there just wasn't room in the house for 10 kids. So we lived our entire lives outdoors.
Where were you in the 10?
I was number 4.
Number 4.
Yeah, I'm the one there's no photos of, but it's okay. I've got over that now. Hardly even think about it anymore. But yeah, so I was not a reader, and that meant that when I did come to write for young adults, and it was targeted into that 14 to 18 sort of age group, which is where we lose a lot of our readers from, going from primary school and then into secondary, that I was able to sort of approach it from the position of having been a non-reader myself and what I would like to have seen in books when I was that age and what would have got me reading. And that's where The Road to Winter came from. So it's the most heartwarming thing that happens to me is that when kids come up at the end and say, that's the first book I've ever read. Your book is the first book I've ever read. And that's like, that to me as an educator, because I've spent my whole life as an educator, that's gold. You can't buy that, So it's an enormous privilege to have those books on curriculum, to be able to engage with kids like that. And they do the most wonderful things.
You must have had some great encounters with young people.
Yeah, beautiful encounters. Yeah. But I also like being challenged. Some kids will not like the book and they'll be happy to ask a question. And,
that's great.
But I was saying earlier that recently I was at a school over on the Mornington Peninsula, whole of year 8. So the whole of year 8 had read the book, and these 3 girls came up at the end and they're sort of holding back, while the kids are getting their books signed. And then they came up and they presented me. They had done a comic book style version of the whole story, 12 pages long, illustrated, each scene. And it was like, here, this is for you. And it was like, what? Yeah, it's incredibly touching.
That lovely creativity that is bouncing off your creativity. That their love for art has been able to be expressed from reading your book.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. You moved to writing books for grown-ups, adult books, through Three Boys Gone.
Yeah.
Was there a difference in your approach when it came to writing for adults? Do you think about the way you write the plot or the way you plot differently compared to aiming at that mid-teen?
Yeah, there are a lot of differences because I wrote 4 books and it was for text publishing at the time, 4 young adult books. And if there's one thing that you learn when you're writing for young adults, it's all about pacing. It's about pacing because you are trying the whole time to keep them in your book and away from their screens long enough to engage them in the story and to get them through the story. So when you bring those same skills of pacing in particular into an adult thriller genre, it works really well. And it was a great foundation for writing for adults because I had the pacing down, which, whether it's crime or thrillers, we really need that understanding.
Yeah.
And there are some restrictions when you're writing for young adults. And it was nice to be able to put those restrictions aside for a bit because when you're writing for young adults, you've got, in order for your books to get into the hands of your readers, like your readers are not the people that write that buy your books in young adult, because the books are bought by parents, by librarians and by teachers. So you're trying to get through them.
Through the gatekeepers?
Through the gatekeepers to get to your audience, but still have the book edgy enough for them to be engaged by it and to be intrigued by it and to be a little bit, this is a bit, this is a bit edgy.
So are there things you wouldn't write about or you can't write about it?
Yeah, absolutely there are. Yeah, when you're writing for young adults, you can, as I did with the Winter trilogy, you can make some things implicit rather than explicit. Yeah. When you're writing for adults, you can make things more explicit, but you can, like when I always tell the story for The Road to Winter, that was published at 58,000 words. The length of the book. When I handed it to text, it was 90,000 words. So 32,000 words. Yeah. Sorry, you're not going to sell a YA book with 90,000 words unless you're J.K. Rowling or someone. Yeah.
Writing fantasy,
Yeah. So, and what was cut out was the more explicit parts of the story, and they were right because they saw the niche for it, which was in that on curriculum, Year 8, Year 9, Year 10, where you cannot have too much explicit detail.
Yeah.
So, but if kids are mature enough and they're directed in the right way by teachers, they can read between the lines as to what has happened to these particular characters beforehand, what their backstory is, and they understand the story better because of that.
Yeah.
So it's liberating to come and write in the adult space because you basically got no restrictions. You can you can use whatever language you like. You can cover whatever themes you like, and it's been quite a liberating experience.
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I know from judging for the David Awards with the Sisters in Crime, have adult crime fiction award and young adult and children's. And it's always interesting to read the young adult and children's stuff because to write crime in that age group takes a lot of skill, and you really see the skill of some great writers writing for young people and the way they've taken what are dark themes but written in a way that kids can absorb. It takes a lot of skill.
It does, yeah.
It's my last question on Road to Winter. I'm always intrigued by trilogies and series because I've spoken to writers who just wanted to write that book and get it published, and all of a sudden that book's taken off and they now have to make it a series, and they're starting to rue choices they made in that first book.
Yep.
Was that you, or had you thought, no, I sort of see where this story is going?
Well, it was funny because, it wasn't funny, it was when I got the deal with Text, I had one manuscript. I was done. I was cooked.
Yeah.
I was finished, And when we went into the meeting where they actually made the offer, they said then, could you write a sequel to this?
Oh, wow.
And I thought,
yes.
I said, yes. So you're going to pay me to do it?
Later.
Sure.
Yeah.
And they actually offered a 3-book deal, but they didn't stipulate what the 3rd book could be. It could have been something completely different. But by halfway through the 2nd book, we realised, well, actually, this could actually be a trilogy. But here's the thing with publishers, that they understand, and they told me this up front. They said, no matter how popular the first book in the trilogy is, the second book will only sell half what the first book does, and the third book will only sell half what the second book does.
Is that meant to encourage you?
Well, yeah. What it means is that you don't pay out your advance on book 2 and book 3.
Yeah.
But they take that on board, because that book now has sold 70,000 copies, probably. So that's well and truly covered them for the other 2.
That's good.
Yeah.
So we'll come to this book. One of the strong themes in this book is environmentalism and environmental protest. Meg's parents have taken her on protests, have made her environmentally aware, but it's all very middle class, the way you do it nicely, you don't go too far. She has taken it too far, well, in their eyes.
Yep.
When she's with the environmental group, they talk about the right way to protest. And you can see this struggle through the book about the right way to protest. How do you get what you want? What's the best way of protesting? Is there a right way to protest?
I've literally been involved in the protest movement and environmental action since the early 1980s. And in that time, innumerable campaigns, a lot in my local area, a lot on a national level, and the way protest has changed remarkably in that time, but it hasn't become any more successful. So I think we're still looking for strategies as to how we actually go about implementing change when it needs to be made. And the idea in the novel, Meg's father, Luke, is actually the river keeper on the Birrarung, on the Yarra River. There is such a job as the river keeper.
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah.
Sounds like a great
job.
job.
A mate of mine, Charlotte Sterrett, who was the river keeper, and then when I was researching the novel, she took me out on the little solar powered boat.
Wow.
We chugged up and down the river, and I got all the goss on the river keeper. So I wanted to explore that idea of generational differences in terms of how we protest and what's legitimate and what's not. I think it's true to say that a lot of people of Meg's generation have lost all faith in institutions, whereas her father is what I call an inside the tent conservationist. So he will go through all the legitimate structures. He will put in submissions to inquiries, and he'll be involved in weeding bees on the river and doing all those practical things that we know we're all good, but Meg is basically lost faith in that, implementing this kind of systemic change that she understands that we need. And so there are these, it was great fun to play with
I can see that.
The conflict between father and daughter, who grounded in love, that they love and respect each other, but they go about things in an entirely different way. So when everything that Meg does comes unstuck with this protest group, then it kind of opens up that festering wound about the differences in the way that we go about doing things.
Yeah. So as you say, her dad has a great faith in the institutions. And in fact, he says, this is a middle-of-the-road democracy. No one disappears. We still have the rule of law. But we can see when the protest goes wrong and the media portrayal of what has happened, that rule of law can easily go out the window.
Yeah.
And Meg worries about disappearing and not being seen again. Yeah. Is that where truth ends, where you lose control of the narrative?
I think the reference to where truth ends is on that governmental level and on the institutions level, that we are told that one thing is happening when something quite different is actually happening in reality. And what's portrayed in the media and what we see in media releases, in particular from a government level, institution level, is this is what we're achieving, this is what we're doing. But in actual fact, all they are doing, I believe, is that they are just treading water. And they're doing nothing more than treading water. At a time when we do need wholesale systemic change, they are doing effectively nothing.
Yeah.
And that's what Meg's perspective is. So how can I influence this in a different way outside the tent, outside those structures, and how can I do that without appearing to be completely radical?
So how do you do it? Have you got theories on how you do it?
Unfortunately, we are locked into a not so much bipartisan anymore system, or two-party system, which is probably three-party system now, unfortunately, which, despite which side is in power, they are serving the same beast. Yeah. And that is power and influence and corporations, and in particular fossil fuel interests. My deep my deep pessimism at the moment comes from the fact that we have a government at the moment with a massive majority, and yet they have done bugger all.
Yep. Yeah,
to actually affect
change.
Yeah, which is really disappointing because they had that collateral to play with, and they chose not to. And in fact, they didn't choose not to. They chose to go more the other way.
Yeah.
So they've been in power again for a month, and the North West Shelf project was given the go ahead till 2070.
Yeah.
So you can't. As somebody said it, it's like someone saying, "Yeah, I'm definitely going to lose weight because even though I'm having cheeseburgers and fries, I'm also having a salad."
Yeah.
And the salad's like going to change everything, and it's not. And we're being fed the salad.
Yep.
That this is what's happening, but the cheeseburgers and the chips are winning.
Yeah, too true. Yeah. So you've clearly got an interest in environmental themes, and you've written about it before in If Not Us as well.
Yeah.
And we've definitely seen, I think, the past decade or plus, a growth in climate as a theme to fiction.
Yeah.
We now have climate literature, Cli-Lit.
Yeah.
We have Cli-Crime as well, climate-related crime books. Are there any writers or thinkers or activists who influence you, who you think about when you're writing about this topic?
Yeah, I'm really led by people like Inga Simpson and obviously Tim Winton and James Bradley. So I'm reading what they're writing. I really love that when Tim Winton was asked what does he think the responsibility of a writer with a platform is in the 2020s, and he said we have an obligation not to look away, and I agree with that. We've got an obligation. If we have a platform, we've got an obligation not to look away. So yeah, I do read quite a bit of that, but I've tried to do something different with this novel because so much of what we call cli-fi, climate fiction, is dystopian.
Yeah.
It's like it's all gone pear-shaped.
It all goes
this is just how we adapt to that different world. Whereas I wanted to ground it. This is written this is about 2026. And so this is where we are now when we still have an opportunity to act. So that's where I wanted, that's what I want my reader to think about.
You see literature having a role in changing people's perspective?
Absolutely. I wouldn't be writing if it didn't. I've always believed that you need to engage with social policy, political, environmental. There's a great saying, if you haven't got a seat at the table, you're on the menu.
Yeah.
And I absolutely agree with that unless you are out there challenging and pushing, you're on the menu. You'll be the one that'll be screwed over. So it's an ethos that it's hard to live with sometimes because sometimes you just rather put your feet up on the couch and, but there's
it gets too much and you think, I can't. Yeah. It's all too much.
Yeah. I do. I have a quote at the start of the book by Greta Thunberg, which kind of guided the book as well. And that is that the quote is, I want you to act like the house is on fire because it is.
Yeah.
And it's true. The house is on fire, but we're sitting on the couch watching Netflix.
Yeah.
Close
the curtains.
Close the curtains.
Don't look at it.
Yeah.
This is a very Melbourne book too, which I love.
Yeah.
The protest happens at an iconic intersection in Melbourne. Meg's dad is the river keeper up Birrong, and it's great when Meg runs away from the protest, she goes straight to her dad and they take the boat up the river, which is great because you go past Dight Falls and all those sites. It's and their parents later have lunch at Pellegrini's.
Yeah.
Is this your love of the city on show here?
Yeah, it is. A book's got to be set somewhere. So I figure, why don't make it somewhere that I'm really familiar with, that I really love, but which is also changing enormously as well, because so much of what Meg has to try and do when she's on the run is to go under the radar. And just in terms of surveillance, whether that is possible
really hard
anymore. Yeah. Because everything that we do every day is trackable in one way or another. From every time we use our credit card, Medicare card, all of those things, every time we sign on for, rewards points or whatever, absolutely. That's all our data. It's all out there and it's all trackable. So I did think about, and this is, bringing back to Melbourne again. Remember during COVID when they used to have the contact traces?
Yeah.
And one guy was was
Been to
traced
all the Bunnings?
all the different Bunnings stores. He was trying to buy a barbecue, and he was kind of tracked all around Melbourne. So Meg actually thinks at one stage, God, if they could do that back in 2020, what can they do now?
Yeah, and that's not even thinking about CCTV. And
No. And you can actually find online, you can find where all the mounted CCTV cameras are in the CBD in Melbourne. So I knew I had to track Meg's route out of the city.
Oh, wow.
Trying to avoid cameras.
Yeah.
But there's only little black spots, and then you move into another one. And on top of that, you've got all of the dash cam that people have now. You have all of the, the security cameras on houses, on the fronts of houses, on the fronts of shops, which of course, police draw on to solve serious crimes. But at the same time, your movements can just be plotted. If you can bring all the evidence together, can be tracked.
Yep.
And
see why people setting books in the 90s now. They just
that's
avoid all that
exactly
technology.
right.
Let's go back to the 90s when you.
Well, the other thing that's changed, the technology that we have at the moment makes it really hard to write, tension-driven novels, because everyone would have the information. Like there's no gap in when something is discovered to people finding out about it. It's almost instantaneous.
And all the people with their phones filming that protest, you would have seen who jumped out of that truck and where they went.
Yeah. That was interesting to play with and to try and figure out how you would, That's why the river was so handy, because you could get up the river to escape the city with her dad.
Yeah.
And as far as I could figure out, there weren't, other than on the bridges, which were focused on the roads, there weren't cameras on the river that could track her on the river.
So tell us about the River Keeper.
Yeah.
What's the story behind the River Keeper?
The River Keeper, my original title for this book was The River Keeper's Daughter. I wanted to write this novel about the River Keeper and the role of the River Keeper, and with that strong environmental theme. But then that grew into something bigger. So I thought I really wanted to experiment with that generational difference in understanding of environment and conservation. So the river, it just seemed like this vein that was running through. It runs through the city like an artery.
Oh, absolutely.
And that gave me that kind of analogy as well with her dad, and then moving through the city, escaping the city, and all the little battles that he fights.
Yeah.
He fights the small battles, and the small battles, when we're talking about wholesale systemic change that's needed, we also need to fight the little battles. The little battles in our own community, in our own street, and he fights the little battles of, at the beginning of the book, there's been an oil spill into the river down a stormwater drain, and it's cooking oil from a fish and chip shop or something like that. And that's his little battle, and he keeps fighting these little battles and basically not winning very many of them.
In the middle of all, he has to abandon Meg and go to a hearing or committee meeting of some variety.
Well, every position has to have funding, and so
exactly goes that
he's worried about where the funding comes from as well.
Yeah. As we've said, this is a thriller, and I love that point of view of Meg trying to get home and the tension that goes with her trying to escape the city and not be seen and not get caught, but still have to go through a couple of police checks and trying to think about, what's my story? Is this legit? Am I looking guilty?
Yeah.
That sequence is really good.
There's a lot about, I really play with that idea of when you're in a really stressful situation, you forget what it means to act normally. And she's the whole time she's trying to think, how should I be acting here? And she realises at one stage when she's fleeing the city that she's actually drawing attention to herself by not being on her phone, because everybody else is.
Yeah, going,
because this has happened in the city and we're getting out of the city. So, and she's sitting at a cafe and she thinks that everyone's looking at her, that
paranoia.
Yeah, that paranoia. And the paranoia plays on her again and again and again. And she's constantly expecting that hand on her shoulder, say, Meg Maher, you're under arrest. But at the same time, she wants to continue to do the things that look normal, like trying to go to work or walk the dog or do things like that. But the whole time churning over this idea of I am being hunted.
But yeah, exactly. Any moment.
Any moment.
I could be found. So what is it about the thriller that interests you? Is it a good way of taking subjects like the environment and exploring it?
Yeah. I was on a panel recently with Bree Lee, who's written a fantastic book called Seed as well, climate thriller. And she used the phrase that the thriller is actually the Trojan horse. So it's the means of getting into the hands of readers in the form of a thriller. So the thriller is the Trojan horse. The themes in there then are the things that are hiding inside the Trojan horse. So the things about climate and activism and surveillance and all of those sorts of things, which we get the opportunity to discuss then. But that's actually also really difficult. Like, people often think if you're writing about something you're really passionate about, that must be easy. But in actual fact, it's really hard because you're constantly having to pull back. One of my editors at Text, when I wrote If Not Us, she had this great saying, and it was, she said, "Mark, I know you want to shout, but you have to whisper." And that's what you're doing through your characters. You're whispering in the ear of your reader, because the moment you as a reader feel as though you're being preached to, you've got every right, throw the book away.
Yeah.
You know, and you can take it, as a writer, you take it to the edge.
Yeah.
And you think, oh God, I hope that doesn't sound too preachy, but I've got to get that point in there somewhere. And so I'm sure there'll be people that'll, absolutely, there'll be critics, or there'll be people who say, oh, this is overly didactic or whatever, but you can't have a theme like that, which is so topical and current and vital, without having some information about it in there as well.
Yeah.
And that's, so a lot of that is covered when Meg goes to this initial training camp, and she meets all of these different people. One of them, an older guy who goes right back to the Franklin, and he talks about what that meant, you know, and how life-changing that was for him, and other campaigns that people have been involved in, and whether like public demonstrations actually make a difference at all.
Yeah.
You know, whether they're just a great sign of, you know, people are interested in this cause, but then they all go to a cafe for lunch and go home and go back to work the next day.
Yeah, exactly.
And whether that changes anything. And there are people that are arguing in the novel, there are people arguing both sides of that. Yes, of course it does, because I realise I'm not alone.
Yeah.
And that reactivates me to continue. So, yeah, and where I just actually use the example in the book as well of, you know, that idea that I'm just one person, what can I do? One of the characters mentions, well, what about Greta Thunberg, who, as a 13-year-old, on her own, every Friday, went and sat outside the Swedish Parliament with a sign, you know, saying we want action on climate. 13-year-old girl. Yeah. And now she's one of the most recognisable faces on the planet, and she's, you know, invited to United Nations, to climate conferences. So that indicates just the way in which every great movement starts with one person, and then it builds from there.
We were talking before about tension and how you maintain and build tension, and how you, I guess, make a rhythm out of it. Emma Viskic talked about it in terms of her, because she's a musician as well.
Yeah.
So she talked about it in terms of the rhythm of music. How do you plot out your tension, and how do you make sure it's not too much or too little? Or
Believe it or not, I relate it to superannuation. You know, where you look at your superannuation and say, no, it's always going up, but in actual fact, it's going like this, you know. And so it is, the trajectory is always up, but there are, you know, there's breathing space in the middle, you know, where Trump does something else stupid and then it drops away and then it comes up again. And it also gives you the opportunity to you've got to give your reader time to take a breath sometimes, and just to understand where they are. It also gives you a chance to throw in just little, you know, things that break the tension. Like
bit of humour.
Yeah, a bit of humour. So like at one stage, Meg, she's thinking about, you know, facial recognition, you know, but she couldn't remember whether that was China or Bunnings that, you know, that would use the facial recognition. So you can throw in little things like that that's kind of, you know, and then you start to build it again. Yeah. But it cannot be just as complete, because you tire your reader out. It's too exhausting. Too exhausting to write.
And you have those two timelines too, where we're back earlier meeting the group. Did you play around with the timelines and how it would help with the tension?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So you get the way often in series they start with that climactic scene of something really action happening, and then second scene is 2 weeks earlier, and so I play around with that, and it does allow for breaking of the tension, relieving the tension a little bit, but then we're thrust back into Meg's current situation again. But at the same time, going back in time allows us to see some of those people that were there and to think, okay, who was in the truck? I wonder if one of those was in the truck as well. Because in the truck, they're all disguised. They're all in hazmat suits, goggles and masks. They don't even know who else is on the truck with them. So when the whole thing goes pear-shaped, Meg's got nothing to trade for immunity. she doesn't know who these people were.
Although she has suspicions because you still have a shape and you still have a way of walking. So she thinks, I think that's so-and-so because it looks vaguely, sort of walks like that. Yeah. It's really interesting. I know you were talking about reading Tim Winton and a few of the other, and Inga Simpson. Do you read thrillers? Are you...
I
do you
do.
like to...
Yeah, I do. I read really broadly. I think every writer needs to read really broadly. And as you know, as a writer, you end up reading a lot of stuff that's for either for panels that you're on or people you're going to interview or people that want endorsements. So it's nice to, when I get the chance, just to choose my own reading. But yeah, I do read thrillers. I'm a really big fan of Mark Brandy and the way in which he builds tension. And he builds it in that way in that fantastic way where the reader knows something that the character doesn't. And, you're almost screaming at the character, no, don't, no, 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 no. And of course the character does.
I've only read Wimmera, and Wimmera leaves you with such a feeling of unease because you can see where this is going and you just, I just don't want to go there.
Yeah.
And yet you do.
You do, yeah.
You've also written some short stories for anthologies, including the one about Nick Cave and Paul Kelly. Yeah. What was that like? How did that all come about?
It was so good. So we began with the Paul Kelly one. So a writer friend of mine in Neil White, who lives in the US, came up with this idea of what if we got 20 writers, each to choose a Paul Kelly song and then use that as a springboard to write a short story. And so he didn't have the contact, so contacted me in Australia and Jock Sarong, so we co-curated and we got the writers together.
So
and virtually
pick all the writers you wanted?
Yeah, pretty much. A couple weren't able to do it because they had books coming out, but we got this great range. And once they chose a song that was theirs, nobody else could write on that song, and then they would use that as a springboard. And it was Fremantle Press put it out for us, which was great. And as soon as that came out, they said, can you do another one? And so we then went for Nick Cave. And when we did the Paul Kelly one, you need to get permission from Paul Kelly, obviously, for this to go ahead. And so you never get to talk to him, you get to talk to his people or his manager. And he said, yeah, sure, go ahead. But then towards the end, he wanted to read the stories.
Oh, wow.
And he wanted a particular image on the cover and a quote. He gave the quote for the cover, which was fantastic. Nick Cave she was like no contact whatsoever other than, yeah, sure.
That's it.
But it was a great little venture to go on.
Then as editor, you've asked people to write stories for you. How did you go with the feedback?
Well, the first one we got, I don't know how we went about it. I think they assigned an editor for that one.
Oh, okay.
From Fremantle Press.
The Paul Kelly one?
Yeah, for the Paul Kelly one. And we did much of it ourselves. Jock, myself and Neil looked at them all and we made little suggestions, but I'm not going to tell people like Tony Birch how to write a short story.
Imagine.
Little bits and pieces. So largely we took them as they came. Yeah. And with the Nick Cave one, we had Kirsten Krauss do all of the editing for us.
Oh, yeah. She's a big Nick Cave aficionado.
Huge, yeah. Yes. And then she took over because they'd done two more, I think, which I haven't had any part of, and they did a Kylie Minogue one and an Archie Roach, aren't she?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I did an Archie Roach and Arnie Ruby one as well. So, yeah, it was amazing because how come no one had thought of this before?
Yeah.
Take a song. The difficult thing being that both of those songwriters are storytellers in themselves. So often the story is already there in the song, but you needed to springboard away from that and write your own story. And no one took on the really iconic ones, like no one took on How to Make Gravy. Because it was like...
So it's already there. What do you have to write?
Yeah, the story's already there. Yeah, and I'm not sure...
I don't think I'd ever decide. It'd be too hard.
No, it was hard. It was really hard.
So what's next for you? What's on the horizon?
I've started writing another thriller, again with pretty strong environmental themes to it, but this one's more about misinformation and disinformation and the way in which it's used to stymie, necessary change. So, but it's again wrapped in a thriller, mostly set in Tasmania.
Right.
So.
If you could have that ready by August, Library Information Week, the theme is misinformation and disinformation. So if you could just crank it out really quickly.
Yeah, okay. I'll think about that, but I'm about 20,000 words in. I've got no idea where it's going or what's going to happen.
So you're a pantser or a plotter?
Pantser, yeah, total. Yeah.
Do you start with just the little, I think I want to do this and that's it?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
And then it just builds. But I have that mantra of when I'm writing of what would logically happen next. And when you're writing a thriller, that just makes sense. What would logically happen next? And once you do that, and then you start swapping the chapters around where we're going back in time and forward in time, and that structural part of it comes later. But so I'm basically writing two narratives and then I'm joining those two narratives together. One from 3 months earlier with Meg and one in the aftermath of the explosion.
Yeah, yeah.
And plus I'm writing from the point of view of her dad as well. So Luke has his own POV.
Yeah, yeah, which is great, yeah. All right, I think I've asked all my questions. Open to the floor. This is your opportunity to quiz Mark about writing, how he writes, how you get published. Do you really not know where it's going?
No.
Oh, man.
I had a problem with, because both of my adult books, they're basically 5-day thrillers. So they all happen in very short space of time, 5 days. So the kind of themes that I'm dealing with are not going to be resolved it's impossible to be resolved in 5 days. That's where the thriller element of it comes in, because the climax and the conclusion are all around what happens to the characters rather than the overall themes. So in Three Boys Gone, Three Boys Gone is about it's about an outdoor education excursion that goes horribly wrong. Things go horribly wrong in my books. Yeah. Horribly wrong when 3 teenage boys run ahead of their bushwalking group on a school camp and they throw themselves into a wild sea for reasons known only to them. And when their young teacher arrives on the scene, she makes the decision not to attempt to rescue them because she knows she'll die as well. And all 3 boys drown. So she then has to justify that decision to the grieving parents, to the school community, to the police, to the coroner, to her family, to her partner, to herself. So you can't resolve something like that in 5 days.
Oh, God. That's a lifetime of therapy.
No, you can build a thriller around it though, where it reaches a climax within those 5 days, and then try and round a few things off in an epilogue as well.
But if you don't know how it's going to end, Mark.
Well,
how do you know when you've got
Well, that's the thing. Like what I was going to say with Three Boys Gone was that I was writing basically a book about guilt and dying and grief, and I got about halfway through it and I thought, I can't. What am I going to do with this? And so then it kind of pivoted into a thriller so that I could find an ending. And so I hadn't set out to write a thriller, but when you think about how many books have been written about grief and guilt and dying, I think there's been enough without me adding to the canon. So I was happy to turn that into a thriller. And it's also the difference between that you want your book to sell.
Yeah.
And you need a contract. So if you're going to write a book that's saleable, it's got to have something, it's got to have something that's going to pull the reader in. And as we know, it was probably tending towards literary fiction, which if it sells 3,000-4,000 copies, that's seen as a good result. Whereas a thriller will sell 10,000-20,000 copies. So that's a big difference for a publisher.
Oh yeah.
So if you want to get a contract, you do have to have something that the publisher sees as being sellable.
Yeah. Yeah. We were talking before about how the term page turner can almost be derogatory. Oh, page turner. But that's what we all want, isn't it? Yeah. To read books that we feel compelled, whether it's literature or genre.
Yeah. And they're also incredibly hard to write. Page turner is incredibly hard to write, to maintain that tension and to keep you, you get to the end of that chapter at 11 o'clock at night and you're thinking, oh, that's it from, oh, hang on. Whoa.
Yeah.
And, we drag you on into the next one. Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. That's what a page turner is. And it's really hard to write, hard to craft. Yeah, there's a couple of things there. Number one is that I think so much of our life now is spent on screens, at work and then at home. So that opportunity to actually pick up something physical, and we know that our brain responds differently to words on a page than it does onto the screen. I see that as a sanctuary. That's what I'm trying to. That's what I tell kids as well, because so much of the way in which they gain information and they learn things is catered for them. It's basically an algorithm that's deciding what they're going to find out and how. And so, reading is one of the last great freedoms that you have. Because you can go into a library or into a bookstore and you can choose the book that you want to read, and nobody else is telling you, trying to channel you into this.
If you like that, you must like this.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So there's that aspect to it. The other thing is that I think writing is changing as well, in that the way in which a lot of writers, I'd include myself in this, of writing is more cinematic, is more visual, because you all know you have that movie in your head anyway going on as you're reading a book. So if the descriptions are vivid enough and you can evoke the setting well enough and the conflict in it, you've got that movie happening anyway. And that, in that way too, it's the great thing about reading, because reading then becomes a creative task as well as the writing. I spend virtually no time physically describing what my characters look like, because it doesn't matter, because that character's in your head.
Yeah.
And you will picture them in the way that you want to, and that's great. Go for it.
Although I have discovered not everybody has the movie going through their head.
Really?
Not everyone can visualise what they're reading, which is interesting. And I think the downside to that too is when the movie's made and you think, those characters are not what I saw in my head.
Yeah. There's very few, I can think of very few movies, especially books that you really love. You almost don't want to see the movie because it's going to destroy that. I think one of the very, very few ones that's been done as close as it possibly could was The Book Thief, the movie that they made of The Book Thief. Yeah. It was beautifully done and close enough to, what was going on for the reader in their head.
I think the Slow Horses series was, Gary Oldman is just spot on. Anyone else?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I've been involved in, I don't know how many different groups, and they're all, the interesting thing with the book, they're all equally vulnerable to infiltration, because if you hold a protest, you hold a rally, you've got no control over who turns up. I've been involved with organisations where from the very beginning they've been infiltrated. And where somebody's been planted in there.
Really?
Yeah.
What, police or
no, it was
groups?
Media.
Oh, media.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So somehow everything we're going to do was known in advance, and so we, eventually clued that there was somebody that was, letting it slip, a mole. Yeah, basically. But I think that every one of those organisations, and I'd make the point in, I think Extinction Rebellion does fantastic things, but that's pretty on the line stuff, because you're basically allowing yourself to be arrested. And the distinction with the group here that I talk about is they want to do everything that Extinction Rebellion did, but they're going to run. They're not going to allow themselves to be caught up in that, in public trials and the court system, and that the woman on the bridge in Sydney, Coco, who was also, I think, on the peace flotilla going to Gaza. She was one of the ones who was arrested in the last lot. So it's every one of them is different, but I think that they are getting so much more savvy, so much smarter, in that action now is multi-pronged, and there are the traditional forms of that are part of that, which is street protests and signing petitions and things like that. Then there's another look to it as well, which weaponises social media, which gets to shareholders, which gets to banks, which basically follow the money. And that's the other arm of it, and that's shareholder activism in particular, where they're trying to have an influence by following the money. And I think that I was involved in a campaign in Anglesey, where I live, to shut the coal mine, Alcoa coal mine and power station. And while we had all the street demos and things, and we had this sort of public face of it and the stickers on the cars, behind the scenes, this is before Twitter turned into a cesspool, where it was really a tool that could be used to get to companies in particular, to get to shareholders, to get to banks. And we basically won that campaign by cutting off the money supply for anybody who was going to buy into the power station. So it was a dirty old coal mine and power station, and we said that we will expose you if your money is that's where they get the money from. We will expose you. And everyone's very worried about their climate credentials and their sustainability now in a way that they, perhaps haven't been before. I'm not sure if that answers your question. I saw Bob Brown recently at a festival up in New South Wales, and it's like talk about, we're riding on the shoulders of giants. Well, he's one of them.
Yeah, he was at Clunes' Booktown this year.
Right, yeah. Fantastic speaker and human being.
Yeah. We're getting close to ending. Last questions? Anyone? Angela?
I finished teaching 7 years ago now, And so all of my young adult novels I wrote when I was teaching. And it's one of the reasons why I didn't write in that genre I don't write in that genre anymore, because I don't have that contact with kids anymore. I don't get the opportunity to. I ran a residential campus, so I was with them every day, and not dissimilar to what you've got here. And now I'd miss so many things. You know, I'd feel like a fraud if I was trying to write into that space, because their lives change so quickly. The language that they use.
And the dialogue, getting them right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now I'm in a privileged position of being able to write full time and do the schoolwork still for the young adult novels. So yeah, I'm enormously privileged to be able to do what I do. Mm. One of the smart things that we did, my editor directed me, was not to ground them in a particular time. So the first 3 are actually dystopian, but they could be any time.
Because there is no sense of time. You're right. There's no sense of time.
No.
Yeah.
So you want to make the novel timeless if you can. And the other one, I mentioned that, you know, the coal mine, the power station in Angles, that's what If Not Us is about. But it's through the eyes of a 17-year-old boy, and he gets involved in the campaign really reluctantly. And he only goes in because his girlfriend, you know, is caught up in it and pulls him. And she's an exchange student from the Netherlands. So she sort of drags him in.
Thank you so much.
That's a pleasure.
Fantastic. Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for coming along.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Please.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Booktown on Sunday is presented by Creative Clunes. Tax-deductible donations to keep our stories alive can be made at creativeclunes.org.au.